400 miles above the East China Sea, something is wrong in the water. Analyst Jason Wang had been monitoring the region's ship tracking data for years. He knew what that stretch of ocean looked like. Chaotic, crowded, 1.5 million vessels a year pushing through lanes so busy that AIS signals blur together into static. He knew what fishing looked like. He knew what weather did to a fleet. What was on his screen that morning was none of those things. Stretching across the satellite frame, in two perfect inverted L shapes, each running nearly 460 kilometers end to end, were boats. Thousands of them, holding formation in open ocean, motionless. Around 2,000 vessels, gone from their routes, out of their ports. Sitting in cold water on Christmas morning, in a shape that only makes sense if someone told them exactly where to go. The formation was so dense that incoming cargo ships had to detour around it or thread through the gaps in zigzags. The pattern returned on January 9th through 12th, roughly 1,400 vessels holding position for more than 30 hours. Then again in late February, 1,200 boats in two parallel lines, 3 musters across 3 months. Previous gray zone operations in the Spratly Islands had rarely exceeded 100 vessels, and those gathered at sheltered anchorages, not open seaways. What happened this winter was categorically different. The boats are not independent fishermen. AIS data showed the vast majority came from Zhejiang province, where several maritime militia ports are located. The militia draws from state-run fishing fleets, whose crews train as military reservists, with active duty officers embedded in leadership. Some individual vessels, cross-referenced against Chinese state media, had documented histories of prior militia deployments. The U.S. Naval Institute estimates China holds a potential pool of 200,000 such vessels. What assembled off Ningbo was positioned directly across major shipping routes, running from Shanghai waterways that would be strategically critical in any crisis. What the formations were actually for is where analysts split, and the theories range from plausible to unsettling. The most straightforward reading is blockade rehearsal. Gregory Pauling of the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative assessed the maneuvers as a test of whether civilian vessels could be rapidly mustered at scale for a quarantine, a blockade, or other pressure on Taiwan. 3 days after the first drill, China announced Justice Mission 2025, naval exercises around Taiwan, explicitly framed as blockade practice. The timing was not subtle. Others have pointed to Japan. Naval War College professor Andrew Erickson noted the operations could signal opposition to Tokyo, or rehearsal for confrontation there, given that Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has openly pledged to militarily defend Taiwan, a statement that triggered significant rupture with Beijing. A wall of fishing boats in the East China Sea is one way to send a message without firing a shot. A third theory is less visible, but potentially more consequential. PLA and officers have advocated using the civilian fishing fleet to approach U.S. ocean surveillance ships and deploy towed gear or nets to interfere with their operations, covering the movements of China's own submarines beneath. Chinese military experts believe the U.S. undersea surveillance network suffers from vulnerabilities across the sheer scale of the Western Pacific, and that degrading enough sensor nodes could blind the system entirely. 2,000 boats dragging equipment through a sonar field, legally untouchable, is a remarkably efficient way to go dark on a navy without drawing a weapon. Track that many surface contacts simultaneously, and the submarine slipping up beneath them becomes very hard to find. Some analysts have noted a simpler use: pure saturation. Flood the radar picture with thousands of identical returns, strain the drone monitoring systems, and force defenders to spread thin across contacts that lead nowhere. Erickson called the formations, quote, a huge, precisely geo-coordinated flash mob, adding that their scale, geometry, and rapid assembly and dispersal are irreconcilable with normal fishing behavior. The strategy's durability lies in what it cannot legally be called. A warship in hostile waters is an act of war. A fishing boat is a civilian vessel, protected under international maritime law for centuries. China's maritime militia exists in that gap, a military capability wearing a civilian face that cannot be fired upon without triggering an international incident, and can revert to fishing the moment attention arrives. China's conventional navy lacks the dedicated lift to move enough troops and equipment across the Taiwan Strait on its own. The fishing fleet is not a supplement to that plan. It's a load-bearing wall. Beijing has said nothing. Japan's Coast Guard declined to comment, citing the need to protect intelligence gathering capabilities. The world's largest navy now has a shadow fleet to match, and it doesn't appear on any military register. It flies no warship's flag, and under the laws that govern the sea, there's almost nothing you're allowed to do about it. The video is 47 seconds long. No sound, just a camera feed. Low, fast, skimming rooftops and blast walls at the edge of Baghdad International Airport. The image tilts and corrects. Then the target comes into frame, a Black Hawk helicopter sitting motionless on the ramp at the American Victory Base complex. Red crosses on the fuselage, a medevac bird. The feed cuts out on impact. The helicopter is destroyed. The Iraqi militia that built this drone didn't need a runway, a logistics chain, or a trained pilot. Just a camera, a controller, and a clear enough line of sight to fly it through the front door of one of the United States' most established military bases in the Middle East, and walk away with the footage to prove it. For Washington, this drone strike is a worrying indictment. Victory Base Complex is not an obscure outpost. Located next to Iraq's largest and busiest airport, it's anchored the American military presence in Iraq for over 20 years, and by any reasonable assumption, should have layers of counter-drone capability in place. It had been hit by FPV drones earlier that same month. This was not a surprise attack against an unknown vulnerability. It was a repeat strike against a known one. And yet, nothing engaged. No interceptor launched. No gun system fired. No electronic countermeasure jammed the signal. And a detail that carries its own dark irony, the base's AN/MPQ-64 Sentinel radar, whose entire purpose is to detect and cue defenses against exactly this kind of threat, was destroyed by a second drone just moments later. Part of the answer as to how the militia was able to carry out this attack lies in the nature of the weapon itself. FPV drones, flying fast and low, are notoriously difficult to detect on radar, including systems specifically designed for counter-drone work. And if the drones used fiber optic control links rather than radio signals, which the quality of the uninterrupted video feed strongly suggests, then jamming would have been useless regardless. A wire cannot be jammed. Beyond that, there's a chronic shortage of the directed energy and other counter-drone systems the US military actually needs, and those it does have are spread thin across multiple theaters. But perhaps the most unsettling dimension of this story isn't the defense failure at all. The drone that destroyed a $21 million helicopter and a multi-million-dollar radar system cost somewhere between just $300 and $500, assembled from commercial components, the kind of parts available to anyone with a shipping address. This is the arithmetic that's been keeping defense planners awake since Ukraine made it famous. An attacker who can field a weapon for the price of a cheap laptop against a defender whose every countermeasure costs orders of magnitude more. And the problem resists solution, not just economically, but architecturally. The air defense systems the US military relies on, the radars, the interceptors, the surface-to-air missiles, were designed and procured for a different world, one where the threat had a logistics chain, a signature, and a price tag that could not be outspent. None of that applies here. The entire edifice of Western air defense doctrine is, in a meaningful sense, the wrong tool for this fight. To complicate matters further, that fight is not unique to the Victory Base complex. Every airbase, every forward operating location, every installation where aircraft sit parked and fueled and ready, is now a viable target for something that costs less than a flight ticket to get there. The mathematics don't change with geography. Neither does the vulnerability. For years, drone incursions over sensitive American facilities were treated as a nuisance problem, perplexing, sometimes alarming, but not yet a crisis. What happened in Baghdad is a harder argument to dismiss. If a handful of commercial drones can destroy tens of millions of dollars of military hardware on a major, long-fortified American base without a single countermeasure being attempted, then the question is no longer whether this can happen elsewhere. It's whether anything currently in place would stop it. Somewhere on the shortwave band, at 4625 kHz, a signal has been transmitting almost without interruption since at least the early 1980s. Not music, not speech, just a short mechanical buzz, repeated roughly 25 times a minute, 24 hours a day, through every ceasefire and crisis and change of government the world has seen since. Thousands of people tune in to listen, not because there's anything to hear, but because occasionally, without warning, the buzzing stops. a human voice reads out a word in Russian, sometimes a string of words, sometimes just numbers. Then the buzzing resumes, and the world is left to wonder what was just said and to whom. It has a habit of happening just before major military and political events. In March 2026, for the first time in a long time, the voice came back with a new enigmatic message. Enthusiasts have christened this mysterious radio station UVB-76, though it's often known by its nickname, the Buzzer. Its transmitter is currently located outside Moscow, almost certainly operated by the Russian military, though this has never been officially confirmed. It belongs to a tradition that dates back to World War I. Shortwave stations that broadcast coded messages openly, audible to anyone with the right receiver, but intelligible only to whoever holds the key. The buzz itself is thought to function as a channel marker, holding the frequency open and occupied, ready for when it's needed. The voice messages that occasionally interrupt it seem to follow fixed formats: call signs, numbers, code words, always read in Russian by a live human voice. Their content has never been decoded publicly. The most dramatic theory related to the message's meaning, popular online, is that they are connected to Russia's nuclear failsafe system, that if the signal were ever to go silent, it would trigger an automatic retaliatory strike. Compelling, but almost certainly wrong. The signal has been interrupted and switched off for maintenance many times without consequence. It was even silenced as recently as November 2025, when a Ukrainian drone struck a nearby power station, though it was quickly reactivated. But while UVB-76 may not be for forcing a missile launch, with the new message delivered in March 2026, there's no denying the unsettling associations with nuclear weapons. The broadcast consisted of a single word, degazator. In Russia, it means something like decontaminator or degasser, a word that's been linked to the neutralization of chemical or radiological contamination. It was transmitted 16 times in one day, alongside a flurry of other coded voice messages. Some analysts have suggested that this latest transmission could fit into a disturbing pattern. The radio station grew significantly more talkative after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was particularly active in the days before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In September 2025, an unusual transmission preceded a Russian drone incursion into Polish airspace by hours. Are these mere coincidences, or is something darker at play? Like almost everything about the buzzer, it's a question without an official answer. Yet UVB-76 was not the only strange signal stirring in spring 2026. Almost exactly 12 hours after the US and Israel launched their joint airstrike against Iran on February 28th, a new transmission appeared for anyone with a shortwave radio to hear. It was a man's voice, reading numbers slowly and clearly in Farsi, twice a day, every day. The message would run for a stretch, pause, and then a single word, meaning attention, would be pronounced 3 times before the numbers resumed. It ran for 7 days, then went silent, before reappearing on a different frequency. As with UVB-76, who was sending it, who was receiving it, and what it meant remains unknown. Yet the timing was too precise to be random. Iran, it seemed, had a buzzer of its own, and whatever it was saying, it had started talking the moment the bombs started falling. In both Russia and Iran, whatever was transmitted has already been heard. Whoever it was meant for has already received it. Somewhere, a message that sounded like noise to the rest of the world meant something very specific to someone, and whatever it told them to do, they have almost certainly already begun. On the night of March 25th, 2026, Ukraine reported a successful drone strike on Vyborg shipyard in western Russia. The announcement was borne out by satellite imagery. The patrol boat Purga, a brand new icebreaker, not yet even in service, was left listing 40 degrees. Her hull pressed against the vessel moored alongside her, taking on water through compartments that were never meant to flood. Yet, as Russian investigators inspected Purga, something didn't add up. Perhaps Ukraine was giving itself more credit than it deserved, and the truth was something more sinister. Purga is no ordinary vessel. Built for the FSB, the successor to the KGB, and the agency responsible for protecting Russia's borders. She was designed to operate in the Arctic, breaking ice and projecting Russian sovereignty across the northern sea route. The polar shipping lane that Moscow considers a strategic and economic lifeline. Russia has been racing to militarize and control that corridor for years, and the Purga is a key piece of that ambition. She's also, as it turns out, almost impossible to replace. Russian shipbuilding has been under severe strain since the invasion of Ukraine, battered by sanctions and the loss of Western components and expertise. The Purga had been years in the making. There's no spare, which makes the story of what really happened on March 25th all the more consequential. There's no dispute that Ukraine launched a massive drone assault across the Leningrad region that night, nor that Vyborg was one of their targets. But as the fires raging throughout the shipyard eventually died down, the FSB began to sense something was not entirely what it seemed. Aerial drones leave traces, scorch marks, blast damage, entry holes in the superstructure. The Purga had none of those things. What she had instead was a catastrophic list, flooding from below, her hull taking on water in a way that pointed not to something that had hit her from above, but to something that had reached her from underneath. Could the attack have been carried out by an underwater drone? An unmanned submersible slipped silently into the dock under cover of the wider attack would detonate against the hull below the waterline. Ukraine has used such weapons before. Or perhaps it was a limpet mine, placed by a diver operating in the darkness of the harbor, a method as old as naval warfare itself, and one that leaves almost no visible trace. Yet within hours of the attack, the FSB had another theory, and they weren't sharing it publicly. What they were doing was moving, fast. Night shift workers at the shipyard were pulled in for questioning. Mobile phones were confiscated and searched. A special filtration zone was established at the facility, with investigators working through the night. Divers were sent into the freezing water around the dock. From the outside, it looked like the response to an attack. From the inside, it looked like something else entirely. The FSB weren't hunting for evidence of a drone strike. They were looking for a traitor. Specifically, they were looking for someone who had been inside the shipyard, with access to the Purga's ballast control systems. Someone who may have opened the Kingston valves from within, and then walked away, while the sea did the rest. The agency that exists to protect Russia from internal threats had apparently concluded that one of those threats had just sunk its own ship. The suspicion didn't come out of nowhere. It sits in a much larger and more disturbing context. Over 150 people have been convicted of sabotage-related offenses inside Russia in 2025 and early 2026 alone. Arson attacks on infrastructure, assassinations of senior military and intelligence figures, strikes on facilities deep inside Russian territory. At least 20 generals and high-ranking officers have lost their lives in circumstances that could not credibly be described as coincidental. Ukraine's military intelligence directorate has been running what amounts to a shadow war inside Russia's borders, and by all available evidence, it's been remarkably effective. This reframes the question of what happened at Vyborg entirely. This was not necessarily a lone insider acting on impulse. It may have been a carefully placed asset, recruited and activated as part of a coordinated campaign, one that chose its target with considerable precision. Of all the ships in all the shipyards in Russia, the one that ended up being hit was the FSB's own Arctic patrol vessel. Whether that was operational planning or dark irony, it's difficult to say. As the days passed, Purga stayed where she was propped up by her neighbor, oceanographic research vessel Vice Admiral Berlichev, which likely lost much of its sensitive instrumentation as a result. No salvage crews or cranes were deployed to attempt to save the stricken vessels, not through indifference, but because Russia appears to simply lack the equipment needed to stabilize and refloat a vessel listing at that angle. Yet perhaps the greatest weakness exposed by this attack is not the vulnerability of Russian ships, nor its inability to save them once they've been hit, but the presence of those who want to bring it down from the inside. The nation's borders, its bases, and apparently its most sensitive military facilities are only as secure as the loyalty of the people inside them. In Vyborg, that loyalty may have just been tested.